Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today in this video I am going to do a comparison between these two scooters. I've been riding these for quite some time and they're really excellent scooters, but very different, as you can tell. One is rugged, kind of like an off-road dual sport scooter. One is more of a street bike. Which bike is right for you? We're going to find out in this video. Very distinct features that you have on the PCX is a very thin tire in the front and the rear. This is a 14-inch tire. On the Zuma, you have a knobby that's 12 inches. And it's much shorter, but it's also thicker. The reason you would want that is that it, for example, it is a better off-road tire. It tends to be a little bit more stable on a gravel road. This, if you take it on a gravel road, because it's so thin, it feels almost like a bicycle. If your priority is have something that can go over some gravel roads, that is definitely better than this. The benefit of the PCX having a 14-inch tire, I really believe that this is the best combination for scooters, because you have scooters that have 16-inch wheels, 15-inch wheels, 12-inch, such as the Zuma. You have 10 inches. 14 seems to be the best of both worlds. It still feels like a scooter, and it still has that handling of a motorcycle. When you go higher than that, 15, 16, it tends to handle very much like a motorcycle, which in a way is good, but at the same time, it doesn't have the peppiness of a scooter. On a 14, it still does. Now this little knobby tire with the Zuma, it looks great. Downside right off the bat is it is extremely noisy. If you're gonna ride it on the highway, it is noisy. 12 inches, it's good for light gravel work. This is the type of bike that you could take it on a campsite, you know, put your trailer or whatever, ride it around, and it feels absolutely perfect. But at the same time, you don't have a lot of travel suspension. It does have these gaiters to kind of resemble an off-road bike. It has like this fender for, it's just a very off-road, rugged type of bike. And a lot of times, you know, you heard that saying, you eat with your eyes. It's the same thing with some of these bikes. Even though the Zuma has got some light off-road capabilities, it's not an off-road bike. Very thick tire does help with some instability in gravel. You know, some roads that are being paved, on the PCX, you really feel it moving around. On this, not so much. It is a very thick tire, and it is fun riding a scooter off-road. I used to ride my Yamaha C3 off-road, and I thought that was great. Up front, you also have a large disc brake, and this apparently is not ABS. Generally, this tends to be like an ABS thing right away, but apparently that's not ABS. On the PCX, you have a low headlight. Some scooters have a much higher up, but this is a low rider sort of bike. It's got two LED bulbs, and the newer ones even have more distinct LEDs. And it's also got blinkers here, blinkers there, another light source there, and the illumination is pretty decent. The headlights on the Zuma are better than this. On the Zuma, you have an extremely distinct headlight. It actually reminds me of Johnny 5 from Short Circuit. The headlight, especially the low beam light. So on the Zuma, you have this. It's a round bulbous light, and this is a flat light for the high beam. The low beam is actually one of the best headlights I have ever seen. The projector cuts off the light from the top, and the high beam is actually not that good, but this is extremely usable. Distinct feature is that as you move the handlebar, you have a little light here, and it shines on the ground, but it's not very powerful, so it's not very usable, but it is a nice feature. On the PCX, the headlights are adequate. They're not as good as the Zuma. And there you go. High beam, low beam. Yeah, on the Zuma, it's much more distinct. I mean, like, you have the projector here, and then you have this little beak for the high beam. It's very interesting. And here's the logo for Yamaha, but very distinct looking. Of course, this might be a selling point for a lot of people, and that's the flat floorboard. And if you have to have a flat floorboard, there's very few bikes out there, but the Zuma is one of them. And I have a 10 and a half inch foot, and I can fit it here pretty well. Some people put it here as well. I just don't think there's a lot of space for your feet on here. But the reason people like the flat floorboards is for carrying capacity, putting boxes, cargo. I really don't find that to be as useful as I'd like. So the problem is when you have a flat floorboard and then you have the various things here for the bike, they basically raised the platform. So one of the things that you keep doing is that when you get on the PCX, the seating position is so much better because your feet are about here. And that's a much more natural position than having to constantly do this. It almost feels like you're jumping up into the platform and then your knees are way too high compared to your hips. And I don't find that to be particularly comfortable. And I don't think it's a good position. On the other hand, the PCX does not have a flat floorboard, as you can tell. And another really good thing about the Zuma is that you can just kind of, if you have issues with your knees or whatever, getting on and off the bike, it's much easier getting on and off the bike when you don't have to like swing your legs over. But because of the low height of this, it's really not that big of an issue. You'll just go like that, so it's not that big. But when you sit on this position is much more natural. And you also, you know, on the Zuma, even though it's flat, you really don't have space to kind of vary up your feet. On this, I can vary it up here, put it back here. I could also put it behind here. And this is a little bit of a hack for the winter because this hump here actually shields your foot from any wind. So this is it's a great idea that they flared this thing out just to protect your feet and get the aerodynamics a little bit better. Another very interesting thing about the PCX is that you operate the key and then you open up the fuel with a little button on right next to the key, and that's where your fuel cap is. So you might be wondering, well, why is such a big deal putting the fuel cap there? Well, let's say that you are filling up at a gas station, and most of the time when I get to a gas station, I don't get off the bike. You just put your credit card or whatever. This is much easier to fill up than the Zuma. Here's another really weird thing that Honda does. This thing, why do they keep insisting on using this in all their bikes? Even the NC750X, the NC700X, still uses this lame thing that you have to kind of like figure out where to put it. And I usually like just drop it and then it rolls all over the floor. But it's a small thing compared to the annoyance of the Zuma. Because this is a much better way of filling up the gas. You get the thing, you fill it up, you're gone. You close it, you're ready to go. On the Zuma, fill it up. It seems like it would work out the same way, but it's not. The filler is here. And you have to get your key, do this, no big deal. So you take, usually the gas pump is on the right side. You bring it, you have the cable coming through here, and then to get it out, you get fuel all over. At least for me, this is a much more clumsy way of having the gas cap. Here, it's much easier to move it. I know it seems like I'm just complaining about these little things, but it really is kind of an annoying thing. I know that they meant well. It's also harder to see the level of the fuel on this filler. It's just not, but look, at least Yamaha did this, because if I had to remove a cap, put it somewhere, it would be extremely annoying. I don't know why Honda does that. I suspect they're just trying to save costs with the gas cap, but enough's enough. I mean, we know that Honda knows how to build some hinges. I mean, you can outsource this. But this is a worse way of filling up, I believe. When it comes to maintenance, both of these bikes are easy to maintain, but this is a really great feature as opposed to the PCX. Air filter is here, CVT is here. You don't have to remove any plastic to get to the Zuma's transmission. It's that simple. I wish that Honda did this, you know, because on the Honda, the airbox, which is much simpler, you can remove it without removing plastic. But to remove the belt, transmission, the weights, you're gonna have to remove this piece of plastic. You can get to it without it, but it just doesn't make any sense. So with the addition of the plastic, you're also gonna remove the rubber floorboard and pop it out. So that's why on the Zuma, it's a little bit easier. Blinkers are these old school antiquated blinkers that you see on many new bikes from Honda that they insist on using, and they're low to the ground. And on the Zuma, also antiquated Euro clear lenses, they put them high up. This is one of the weaknesses of the Zuma, putting the blinkers here, because as you know, when you put your feet here, it hits your knees when you're turning. And if you're not ready for that, you could possibly drop the bike. So these blinkers, Yamaha could have mounted it here. I know they didn't want to mount it here because of potentially like crashing, because this bike is styled like a off-road bike. So I think they assume people are going to be riding on gravel. And these are some of the first things that people break. The seat on the PCX, I can't say it's comfortable. It does have this little like lumbar support, which is nice. And this bike is better for short riders. And it's just as tall as the Zuma. The Zuma is just a little bit taller. But because they tapered this side, you can flat foot this if you're a short rider, rather than having the issue with a tall, flat seat like the Zuma has. And this is kind of like a nice sporty tapered look. It actually kind of goes with the flow of the entire body of the scooter, the rear. And it's got a nice texture to it. It's like old school kind of vinyl, different texture. And you got like this nice different color stitching. This seat is actually way less comfortable than the PCX. And it's got a ridge here. So it's flat, very flat here. Then it drops off sharply, so it's not smooth like the PCX. This ridge kind of makes it harder for shorter riders to flat foot. At the same time, it's a more massive, wider seat, but I find it to be less comfortable than the PCX. But a lot has to do with the seating position as well, with the flat floorboard. Things I really like about the Zuma and in general Yamaha's is this. It's a massive grab rail that you can kind of lift the scooter up, put it on the center stand, and this is plastic, but at the same time it feels really substantial. Now on the PCX, it went with a different style. So this, it doesn't have like a loop, so you can't like bungee things onto the seat, which I think is a mistake. You still have plenty of way of grabbing the bike, but I kind of feel like this is not a very nice way of grabbing the bike. It's not substantial, doesn't have it on there, but it's elegant. You know, that's what I think a lot of people would choose this over the Zuma. The Zuma does go with the style, having those big grab handles. It's industrial looking. This one is a sport bike. It's a sporty scooter. Exhaust on this, it's got like a kind of like a cheap plastic covering the exhaust. It's lower mounted than the Zuma. So the Zuma is actually like over here. And then you have two coils in the rear. Pretty simple setup. On the Zuma, you have a very unique style of protecting, and this plastic is better quality than the Honda. It's also unique looking. I actually kind of feel that they need to have two little dual exhaust holes just to make it look a little cooler. It still uses the same coils for the rear shocks. You do have rear foot pegs. These are pretty decent. Right over here is a 10 millimeter that you can use to remove the plastic. It's kind of hidden. The rear wheel of the PCX is fully exposed, and when you look at the Yamaha Zuma, it's got a really large fender, and then it's got a rear tire hugger. On the Zuma, the rear taillight looks kind of like a very modern flat rear brake light, but it's not. Then you have the same cheap Euro-styled blinkers that you have in the front. On the PCX, you have a lower taillight. So everything about the PCX is lower to the ground. I do wish that it was higher because I think that looks cooler. I like taller bikes, but the taillight is right here, low to the ground, same as the Elite 110, and then you have the same sort of styled blinkers. But you know, the beauty of having these blinkers is that you can really just remove them and put like LEDs. Same thing with the Zuma. The cargo rack on the Zuma is way cooler, and it does have a load limit, but people usually tend to ignore those. The PCX, you have this rack, which is an aftermarket. It kind of stands out much more than the Zuma. We look at the controls here. First, you have the key, and the key has that safety feature, which you can manually lock, and it brings a plate on there, and then you put the key back on there and you remove it. On the Zuma, it's much more annoying. So on the Zuma, you have the key, by the way, a foldable key, which is nice. And then you have something really annoying. So in the back, you have the same safety plate. And then if you hit this button without the key, it actually puts the thing down. Yeah, it is nice, but at the same time, a lot of times you will hit it when you are going into a store or something, and it's annoying, especially if you're doing deliveries. Like, you don't want to have to keep doing that. And this one only has an on-off position, and then it has a seat option, which is you just turn the key this way, it opens up the seat. Turn to the on position, you have the seat, you also have the fuel door, 2 cables that open up everything. Then you have this chrome, which I don't like. This would be nice if Honda decided to change it up. And this is a 3D printed thing. It's a hook, because on this PCX they didn't include a bag hook. So I printed this on my 3D printer. Doesn't look great, but at the same time, no hook for your groceries. And on this side, you have a little pocket where I put my change and stuff on here. Very nice to have. On the Zuma, you do not have that. You do not have a glove box, but you do have this pocket. And this pocket, you can see how it goes up to my wrist. That is nice because you can put a bottle of water there. And on the PCX, you don't have that. And then you also have this that the PCX doesn't have, and that's a 12-volt USB charger with a little thing there so you can keep it from getting wet. And then on this side, of course, you have your fuel filler, and then here is the hook. You don't need to print anything out because Yamaha did put this bag hook on here. So it's much more utility driven, the Yamaha Zuma. So let's look at the handlebars. So I have quite a few things happening here, but ignore those. This is a phone mount. Mirrors are over here. You have very standard things, and you have the annoying horn in the middle, blinkers in the wrong spot. That's a Honda thing that they're doing now. And chrome handlebars, which I don't like. The Zuma looks much nicer with blacked out handlebars. And then you have your starter, nice big buttons for everything, kill switch. I have heated grips on this with bar ends. Those are not stock. And the one thing you're going to notice right away is that the gauges are actually like kind of in the bike. You're looking down, so you could completely see them if you didn't have a phone mount. But the biggest difference is that the gauges on the Zuma, they're actually like right over here. You know, this is a 2012, so you're going to get antiquated type of things. It's not even antiquated. It actually looks fairly good. It's symmetrical, and also at the same time, it's got this very thin plastic here that shields it from the sun, so you can keep seeing it. But even during nighttime, very easy to see the gauges. You have a little digital thing. And here's another thing about this PCX. They didn't give you even a clock. There's no clock on here. There's only one trip, one button, you push it. There's trip 1, and then an odometer. Of course, you have a fuel gauge and the other indicator lights. But on the Zuma, you have much more information. You have trip 1, 2, you also have an odometer, and then you have a clock. Zuma, you have the gauge, which is this cluster. Everything is here, including the light in the front. And then you have little dummy lights here, indicators. You have a digital dash, which is nice. You have 2 buttons. When you turn it on, it gives you a nice little animation. And you have trip 1, you have trip 2, you have the odometer, which is already 4,000 miles. You have a clock here. And you also have an oil change odometer, which is kind of crazy, or I should say oil change light. And that's the sort of thing that it would be nice if Honda included it on their bikes. My 2009 T-Max also had a V-belt light or trip. It also had an oil change light. So they could have included that instead of being stingy on the PCX. Zuma did it, why couldn't Honda? There's more of a bend to the PCX's handlebars than the Zuma. These mirrors are terrible. I kind of wish that they gave us a square. I think squares are much more usable than these weird round type of things. In a way, they resemble the design of the headlights, but at the same time, I don't think they did that on purpose. I think what they did is like to save money. They probably have a lot of this mass produced and they just put them on the Zuma. A square one would have been much nicer, or maybe a little bit of a design kind of like the PCX. The stock mirrors from the PCX are much nicer. They also look sportier. And of course, they did not mess around on the Zuma with the turn signal location. This is a much better location for the blinkers rather than the horns down here. And then you have the high beams, pretty standard. And also look at, it's the loudest turn signal indicator I've ever had. Let's open up the seat. This one has got quite a bit of under-seat storage space. It is nice, and at the same time, the battery is over there, very easy to reach. The coolant is here. The coolant bottle reservoir is here. Well done. It has plenty of space. The seat has got this recess in here so you can put a helmet. On the Zuma, same thing. It's actually like a little bit shorter or smaller than the PCX, which is strange because it's a 125. Seat storage, you can see that it's not as big as the PCX. On the PCX, you have this part that's really deep, and then there's a little chunk here. Some people even have these 3D printouts that you can put here to divide things. So right about here, this is kind of like what the Zuma 125 storage is, and then this part doesn't exist. On the PCX, you have a parking brake here that is the worst engineered parking brake I've ever seen on any scooter. So yeah, parking brake on the PCX is useless, but at the same time, the Zuma doesn't have one. And a lot of times I find that you really don't even use it very much. On the Zuma 125, this is a big feature. And not only that is that they made this, and then a lot of scooters started using this. This is, of course, a little cargo rack. It's got a limited capacity, 3 pounds, so maybe a sleeping bag, something. Maybe they also make a rack, like a steel rack that goes on here. There's quite a bit of aftermarket for the Zuma. So you have like these hoops here. You also have a way of strapping things onto this. Really great idea. I love the styling of the Zuma. I think there is a demand for scooters that look more rugged than traditional scooters. Okay guys, let's do a startup of each scooter and see how they each sound. Zuma, very easy. You hold the brake. Very quiet, but there you go. That's how it sounds like. You want a quiet scooter. You don't want a loud scooter. Now let's start the PCX. The PCX uses a different way of starting. It's almost as if it doesn't crank at all, and it doesn't. Honda has got this new technology that they put in the PCX. So when you listen to it, there is no cranking. Scooter has its own strengths depending on the rider's needs and preferences. The PCX is more powerful and geared towards more comfortable urban commuting, while the Zuma has got more of a rugged versatility from a 125. Zuma has got a 1.6 gallon gas tank. The PCX has got 2.1 gallons. The curb weight of the PCX is 286, while the Zuma is 282. Seat height of the PCX is 30.1. On the Zuma, it's 30.9. Height of the PCX is 43.5, and on the Zuma, it's 45.3. The width of the PCX is 29.3 inches, and on the Zuma is slightly wider at 29.9. The length PCX is 75.8, and on the Zuma, slightly larger at 75.9. When it comes to power, the PCX has got the Zuma beat with 15.6. Zuma has got 8.3. The torque of the PCX is 4 Newton meters and the Zuma is 9.6 Newton meters. So the next thing we're going to do is take these things out for a ride and see how each handle. All right. So acceleration is sluggish on the Zuma compared to the PCX, but that's also 25 cc's less than the PCX, so it makes sense. For a 125, this is rather quick, and I don't think anybody coming from a ruckus would think that this bike is sluggish. Now you see this ripple, this road, I'm intentionally on it because this area, this section on the PCX makes the bike go around like twisting, because it kind of follows the grooves of this asphalt that's being put down. So right here, this groove pavement before they actually pave with asphalt, on this bike it wobbles left and right much more than the Zuma. The Zuma is going to be much more comfortable in any sort of like rough terrain, and even has more ground clearance. At least it seems like it, because I've never hit the bottom on the Zuma, and on this one, even on speed bumps, I'll hit the bottom. This is way more stable, and really that is probably one of the only areas that this bike is stable, is more destroyed pavement. So the acceleration of the Zuma is slower than the PCX. Think of the PCX as a sport bike compared to this, and this more as a dual sport. So with the Zuma, you're kind of like sitting on top of the bike. It's a higher position. Your knees are higher up. And, you know, maybe that's just like a little personal preference, but I prefer my knees to be a little bit lower. And also, going into the corners or any sort of like twisty type of thing, it's slower. It's slower moving than the PCX. Going around corners, much nicer. It's much smoother. Honda is known to make smooth bikes, and this is no exception. It's got variable valve actuation, and when you're actuating it, it says here VVA. So if I let go of the throttle and it goes, there's nobody behind me, so don't worry. There we go, it disappears. And then if you're gentle, it will not come on, but it goes on, VVA. I don't think that's needed because it's really not that impressive. Not slow for a scooter. The only thing is, on the PCX, I don't shy away from going on the highway. On this, I avoid going on the highway. It doesn't make any sense because it feels just slightly underpowered. You know, I do have to admit, it is kind of cool riding a scooter that's a little masculine. People, I think in general, people who don't know scooters will like the coolness of the Zuma. And I've always had a boner for the Zuma ever since I saw that 125cc with the round headlights. I loved it. It's such a cool looking scooter. Literally, one of the best things about this is this. The last fill up I did on this, 106 miles to the gallon. And this one's got 21,000 miles already. The Zuma's got 4,000 miles and it gets 95 miles to the gallon. Quicker off the line than the Zuma. And I did a top speed on the Zuma. It's like 58, 59 miles per hour. And even downhill it didn't hit 60. Yeah, this thing stock beats many cars off the line. Even this bike at almost the top speed, it doesn't seem to struggle. Another thing that the Zuma has that this one doesn't is attack. You know, in reality, this bike really shouldn't be compared to the PCX. It's the wrong comparison. It should be compared to the ADV 150. The direct comparison to the PCX from Yamaha is really the S-Max 155. But unfortunately, I don't have that bike, so I can't do it. I have this and that, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. That's full throttle right there. The best thing about riding a scooter is that you can test your speed limit just about everywhere. Full throttle, 37 miles an hour. We're going to go downhill, so we're going to get some extra speed right here. 50, 52, 53. I'll see you at 60. Downhill, 58, 58. 58. Why? I was going downhill. Why wasn't it going? It didn't hit 60. I'm going uphill, max throttle, 55, 54, 53, 52. That's the issue with the 125. 25 cc's too small to keep that speed going. It's got so much kick. For a little scooter, this thing moves so quickly. That's full throttle. It always surprises people. It always surprises everybody that a little scooter can go this fast. So, as you can tell, the Zuma definitely it handles differently. It goes into corners much slower because it's extremely small wheels, and at the same time being thicker, it does make it better for off-road riding. But at the same time, having the large wheels, the large diameter wheels of the PCX, it helps a lot of the stability. So in a way, this feels absolutely like a scooter. Small wheels, it's fun, but at the same time, it's not as nimble because of the thickness. When you have something like an Elite 110, it feels like a scooter, or a genuine Buddy 125, 10-inch wheels, it feels really peppy. This one feels slow off the line. This one feels almost like a sport bike in comparison. Similar top speeds, about 60 miles an hour. You can change that by getting different weights, different transmission components, and you can get a little bit more speed. But stock, the PCX just has this thing beat in handling and everywhere when it comes to performance. But if you like doing a little bit off-road, this is the one for you. It's the thicker tire. If I didn't have my CRF 250L Rally, this would be a killer bike to take it out to like West Virginia somewhere. So when it comes to riding experience, if you intend on riding mostly asphalt, this is the bike for you. But at the same time, if you want to ride throughout the week on asphalt, commute, and then take it out into some light trails, this is the one. I would not recommend taking this because of the thin tires. It tends to get very squirrely in gravel. This one, because of the thickness of the tires, it actually helps it. At the same time, when you are thinking about just commuting, if you want a good commuter bike, the PCX is really like the best overall scooter. This is really the best scooter I have had, even when you compare it to like the SH150, Elite 110. This really feels like it's the best bang for the buck. This one, when it comes to price, it's expensive. This in the used market, it's $3,200, $3,500. People want a lot of money for them. This you can find all day for like $2,000, $2,200. So it is a much more affordable bike than this, but at the same time, this is a better bike. You know, the Honda quality is better. It's got some things that Honda skipped out, like the hooks for the bags, which doesn't make sense. It's got a larger gas tank, so you'll go 140 miles on the tank. This one, 110, you're kind of already reaching the very bottom of the tank. And they're both fun bikes, but I think if you have an overall bike that you also want to go off-road, this is definitely it. This is the better scooter in general for just urban mobility. I think that's the one you want to get. I mentioned this before, the Honda Ruckus should have been this. If Honda made the Ruckus 125 and it didn't lose its appeal, this would have been it. And actually, the styling of it is very Honda-like. You know, the Honda Ruckus was completely new, completely quirky, and I think Yamaha saw a niche in there and went for it. And what they basically made was a better version of the Honda Ruckus. When you look at the Honda Big Ruckus, that bike has no appeal, at least for me. Like, it's a big maxi with the Honda Reflex engine. It just doesn't have any appeal. It's weird looking, okay. But this one, the 125 is good. But at the same time, Honda, build the Honda Ruckus with a 150. That would have been a much better bike. Well, anyway, guys, that's a comparison of these two scooters. Both great bikes. Pick the bike that's great for you and go ride.